o'clock, you're watching Nation Divided on Sky News. So far, we've heard from people across the country, from Glasgow to Chesterfield, Hull to Hillingdon. Now let's hear from our panel here, and they are four people with four very different views on Brexit. Michael Gove is a former Cabinet Minister, Brexit campaigner and, briefly, Prime Ministerial candidate. Sir Christopher Pissarides is a Nobel Prize winner and Regius Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics. Lindsey German was a founding member of the Stop the War Coalition and twice ran for London Mayor. And Lionel Shriver is an award-winning author and journalist whose current book is set in a dystopian American future. Well, in a moment, we'll be discussing whether Britain's future is similarly bleak. But first, a reminder, just in case you'd forgotten, of how we got here.
The dawn is breaking on an independent, united kingdom. A victory for real people. A victory for ordinary people. A victory for decent people.
The British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
June the 23rd needs to become a national bank holiday, and we will call it Independence Day.
Brexit means Brexit. Brexit means Brexit. Brexit means Brexit.
It's about a red, white and blue Brexit. That is the right Brexit, the right deal for Britain.
For those that are here that aren't particularly happy with what's happened in 2016, I've got some really bad news for you. It's going to get a sight worse next year.
Stop Brexit now!
So who else but Nigel Farage to finish that report? And the impact of 2016 on the nation's psyche appears stark. Sky Data asked if the country is more united or divided than a year ago. And 74% said more divided, just 7% more united. We also asked about happiness. 67% of those who responded said we are less happy, just 8% more. Well, Lionel Shriver, let's start with you. Happy New Year and all that, or not as the case may be. What strikes you as someone watching the UK wrench itself from the bosom of Europe, or the clutches, depending on your point of view, about that starkly pessimistic assessment from residents of the UK in our polling?
Well, the wrenching is going on between the two sides of the referendum, much more so than between us and Europe. In fact, there's very, very little communication going on with the EU. And I went through an odd experience of leaving for the summer right before the referendum and coming back to what felt like a completely different country. And it has to do with the fact that I was about to say that the Leavers and the Remainers are at each other's throats, but it really does feel much more that the Remainers are at the Leavers' throats. That the divisiveness that your poll has identified, I have to blame more on the sore losers. I have found it very distasteful to pick up in Remainers' attitudes toward the people who voted for Leave a real contempt, not just a bitterness on their own on account, but an aggressive contempt. And I can't think of anything more destructive for the political fabric of a country. So
sore losers maybe, but Lindsey German, something that also strongly comes through in people's views there, the sense that community relations have really been tested. The UK feels more racist. The threat of race and religious crimes are more real. How concerned are you by, as Lionel said, the perceptions of that changed atmosphere in the UK?
Well, I think there's definitely a sense that the referendum focused on far too much, in my view, on immigration and on questions of race. And I think that actually both sides in the campaign have to take some responsibility for that. This was something which didn't just begin with the referendum. We had David Cameron's horrible campaign about Sadiq Khan before that. So people are worried about that, particularly people from ethnic minorities. But I think all sorts of people are worried about an increase in racism, about this kind of atmosphere. But I think one of the great disservices that's been done since then, and I think really the government has been an absolute shambles in dealing with this ever since. But I think one of the great disservices is to say that this is all about immigration. Even if you look at Lord Ashcroft's poll straight away afterwards, the majority of people said it wasn't about that. A third did say it was about that, so it's an important issue. But I think it's a surrogate, if you like, for all sorts of other discontents. I agree with Lionel. I think people are very unhappy in this country because wages are going down, they can't get houses for their children, there's no spending going into the health service, all these sorts of things. I think it's become a sort of channel for all these issues, and we have to look at some of those issues.
It's also a big leap to say just because people are concerned about immigration to call them racist
Absolutely.
and xenophobic.
I agree. Yeah.
And I was able to watch the U.S. coverage of the referendum, and it was incredibly unfair. All of the media universally jumped on the issue, and it was always interpreted. This is racist. This is the mob coming out in the streets with pitchforks. It was completely unfair to the British public.
So, Michael Gove, where are the sunny uplands then? You know, the predicted economic disaster may not have happened yet, but there seems to be a sense of doom and distress. Britain is hurting. Did Brexit cause this, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think Lionel makes a very perceptive point, which is that many of those who argued for Remain, some of the most prominent figures there, are people who are used to having their worldview validated. And when they received a reverse like that, then for them it was unsettling. And we still have, from some, and to be fair, it's only a minority, a sense of reproach towards the country. And these individuals are often people who, because of their political reach or their media profile, are able to play a part in the national conversation out of all proportion to the genuine numbers who hold that position. So I think that the painting of the sky dark has been done by a limited number of people. The reaction of the majority, actually, as you can see from everything from consumer spending to continuing support for the decision to leave, has been more hopeful. Now, a lot depends, and here I agree with Lindsey, on a range of policies. It's not simply the case that the vote to leave the European Union by itself is a magic wand, but what it can do is that it can unlock the potential for change in a number of areas, both economic and in terms of our identity and our place in the world.
So, Christopher, Lionel said that it's the Remainers that are smarting the most. If it hadn't been so close, would the divisions have been less, do you think? Some people have begun to talk about the fact there should be some sort of majority set. Say 60% had to change the status quo because this is, for many people, such a momentous decision. Do you agree it's a momentous decision?
I would agree with that. I would agree that, like in other countries that have a written constitution, to change the constitution you need a majority more than 50%. And it would have helped, but I'd like to take...
But you don't decide that after the election
No,
is over.
I'm not suggesting now that we should go back and say... No, I'm saying that once the vote is Brexit, it should be Brexit. We should get out as best as we could. But I'd like to take exception, though, to your comment about why the country is divided now. I think for me the biggest problem is the generational one. As someone who comes into contact with young people all the time, I have myself two millennial children born in this country and raised in this country, and there is a very big concern. There's a whole generation of people up to their 30s who were born within the European Union. They saw themselves as European. When they got educated on the basis of the economy being structured to look at Europe and nothing like a special relationship that older people might remember, and they might think we're going to go back to that. Nothing related to the role of Britain in the 1950s and 1960s in the world economy and its global position, more as a country, one of the big European economies, a country within Europe that trades with Europe, compulsory European languages at school that they had to learn. And now they suddenly find themselves that an older generation has voted for them to leave that world, and they have no idea where they're going.
Well, the younger generation certainly look to the economic prospects and the future of this country, don't they? So are doubts over the direction of the country being fuelled by financial worries? Sky Data suggests that it might. When we asked what will happen to the economy when Britain leaves the EU, 45% said it would get worse and 27% said better. Well, those who voted leave appear to have kept the faith, though. More than half, 54%, believed that it would improve. So, Sir Christopher, are 54% of leave voters kidding themselves, in your view?
I think it's more wishful thinking than knowing exactly what will happen. I just cannot see where the improvement in the economy will come from. I mean, I know experts haven't been getting a good press.
I wonder
before
why.
the campaign or after. But what I'd like to know, though, those who think that the economy will be better, where that better will come from. Britain is an open economy. It depends on trade. It's been doing well, at least up to 2008, because of its financial sector, because of exports that it's doing in the financial sector. There was good infrastructure investment, productivity was growing. It's all because of its trade relations. Half of that trade is with the European Union. It's become the financial capital of Europe. It cannot improve on that.
Yeah, but even today, more signs of confidence, retrospectively perhaps, record numbers of cars being sold. The UK service sector grew at its fastest pace in 17 months in December. The Service Purchasing Manager Survey is very optimistic for the future. So too the figures we had this week for construction and the manufacturing sectors. Where are the problems going to come from?
What we are seeing now, some people are interpreting it as optimism, other people are interpreting it as panic buying because the pound is depreciating. All these foreign goods that we're going to buy are going to be expensive. Inflation has been zero or negative, is going to be 2%. Second, there's been a very good reaction from the Treasury, giving up the George Osborne debt reduction policy. There's been a very good reduction, a very good reaction from the Bank of England. Those have short-term impacts on the economy. By voting, you don't suddenly take money away from people and make them feel worse off. It's been a vote. It's negative. They are spending. The economy is doing well because of momentum that it had before the vote. Just wait and see what will happen a year from now. But even worse, wait and see what will happen 10 years from now, where all the economic studies, including the Treasury ones and the one we did at the London School of Economics, concern a world of Britain outside, not what will happen in the transition.
But some of those forecasts haven't, to put it mildly, haven't come true. And today we have the Centre for Business Research from Cambridge University pointing out that actually some of the figures that were produced were woefully inadequate and partisan, generated for political reasons rather than reflecting the economic reality. Now, of course, because we've left the European Union, that doesn't mean that automatically our economy will improve, but it does mean that we have more control over the levers that we can pull in order to strengthen our economy. And one thing that we can be certain of is that countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal and Italy are imprisoned inside the single currency, and as a result, they're much less competitive and they have much higher levels of youth unemployment than they would otherwise have. So we can be certain that the European Union is keeping its southern nations in economic misery, while Britain has the chance to, if it makes the right decisions, become more prosperous, ensure that investment is directed increasingly towards research and development and less towards the corporate interests who've been driving the way that companies operate over the last few years.
But surely we also have to look at some of the more underlying problems of the British economy. When you say that consumer spending remains high, the record borrowing of record personal debt as a result of this. Now, partly this is because wages have fallen since the 2008 crash, that people are much, much worse off, that they're feeling the pinch with all these sorts of things. We have a very, very low investment and low productivity economy, which is, regardless of which way things had gone with the referendum, this is a big problem that people have to deal with. There isn't the investment going into manufacturing, and part of this, I feel, is the emphasis on the City of London and on finance, which has created a big imbalance in terms of the economy and in terms of London. And some of those things need to be rectified as well. And again, there's nothing at all. You don't get any sense of any attempt to end the inequality in this country, which would begin to deal with some of those problems.
Do you not fear, Michael Gove, that there is some sort of perfect storm brewing, which is the inflationary pressures as the pound sinks, uncertainty in business, which means that jobs will be cut or wages will not increase, consumer spending therefore down unless it's on personal debt. And the end result is years of uncertainty over trade. So do you have no concerns at all? As far as you're concerned, it's all just going to be fine?
No, I think that blithe optimism in defiance of every factor that you mentioned would be mistaken. But as Christopher pointed out, it is the case already that the Treasury and the Bank of England have taken some of the steps necessary in order to mitigate risk, and as well as risk downside.
We can't reduce interest rates any lower, and we can't keep having quantitative easing, can we?
No. But part of the problem, I think, is that the policy that the Bank of England has followed in the past, and which was appropriate to deal with particular shocks, now needs to change. And funnily enough, I agree with Lindsey. One of the things
Not twice, that must be it.
It's very bad for Lindsay's street cred. Very bad for her street
yours
cred. But
well.
she's possibly. But she's absolutely right that one of the big weaknesses in our economy has been a failure to invest properly in research and development, and a failure to enhance productivity. And these things can change because some of the levers are now in our hands. And we have seen manufacturing in particular benefit from the fact that the pound has fallen. I think it's probably the case. Professor Shurka Modi, used to be at the IMF, has been arguing today that the pound was actually dramatically overvalued between 2012 and 2015, and at last it's at a level which better reflects the underlying competitiveness of the economy.
Well, we will take a look at how the American economy and the change in leadership there will impact certainly the UK. Also coming up on Nation Divided, which of these faces is most trusted to deliver Brexit? Now, Theresa May has little more than 80 days before her self-imposed deadline of triggering Article 50 to start the process of Brexit. But Sky Data suggests there are severe doubts over the deal that she'll get. When we asked how good or bad a deal the government will negotiate, 42% of people said it would be bad and 22% good. A closer look shows that people who voted remain sceptical. 61% of them say the deal will be bad. Well, Michael Gove, this polling was carried out before the debacle of this week, the resignation of our top diplomat in Europe. Goodness knows how people would feel now about the trust they have in politicians to sort this out. Even Sir Ivan Rogers didn't seem to think the political hierarchy had a grip of this. Are you confident?
Yes, I am. I think it's only fair to say that Sir Ivan Rogers is a very distinguished public servant, and I wish him well for the future. But I do disagree with the way in which his decision to leave has been interpreted. I think that actually, if we look at the very deliberate way that within government, not just Theresa May, but David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, have been consulting widely and then drawing up a priority list of what they want to get out of these negotiations, I think that it's been well handled. And I think that some of the criticisms tend to come from people in my own profession, journalists, who would like to have an inside track on what's going on. But because a tight ship is being run by the Number 10 operation, then some of the details that people would love to prize out aren't there.
OK, it's a little bit like the calls for the Queen to come out after the death of Princess Diana. Does Theresa May now need to come out and tell people it's OK, it's going to be OK, and stop hiding behind the walls of Number 10 and her advisors or even her civil servants if she's still talking to any?
One of the good things about the Prime Minister is that she is not hurried into or cajoled into taking a position simply because the media temperature is getting a little bit hotter. And I think that's absolutely right. You need a cool customer, and that's what she is, who can look at the long term and make decisions about what Britain needs out of these negotiations in order to prepare it for 5, 10 or 15 years hence, rather than simply feeding the media machine.
Well, certainly Theresa May came out the best in our polling. 40% of people thought she would do a good job, 29 bad. Unlike Lindsey German, Jeremy Corbyn, 55% said bad, only 12 said that he would do a good job. Does it worry you that he is the worst of all the politicians we tested? And does Labour and the left have a voice in this at all at the moment?
I think Labour can have a very important voice in it, that Jeremy Corbyn has remained committed to the idea of free movement of labour. He's remained committed to the idea, I think very sensibly, of saying that where there's issues with lots of migrants in a particular area, there should be a special fund which helps to deal with issues of education, schools, housing, all those kind of things. It seems to me they can do that very, very well. I think part of the problem is that some Labour MPs, like, for example, Chuka Umunna, who today has come out with this thing about maybe there should be regional migration, which strikes me as completely crazy. You know, some areas like London can have
fences around them?
And are you going to be allowed? Can you migrate out? You know, if you don't have any migrants in the northeast, are they allowed to come anywhere else? It's completely ludicrous, and it's
fences
horrible.
Takes us quite nicely to Donald Trump, does it not? Certainly, trusted politicians will be fascinating on both sides of the Atlantic. With just over 2 weeks, I think it is, isn't it, until Donald Trump is inaugurated. Do you see parallels here? Do we see the same sort of thing, that Brexit and Trump are all part of the disconnected voices finally having a say, or do you not see the parallels?
I resist the parallels in that I think they are too frequently drawn. And I don't like conflating the Brexit vote and the vote for Trump. They're different countries. There are different issues. There's some intersections. I frankly think that the vote for Trump is much more catastrophic. I'm hoping for the best because it's all I can do. But I think Brexit has the capacity to turn out well, whereas with Trump, at best, we're going to survive him. So I think that the scale is completely different. I think we tend to lose sight of the fact that what we're talking about with Brexit is, here's a medium-sized country that has decided to leave a trade bloc. It's not the end of the world. And the EU is not the vessel of all goodness and light in the world. It is a flawed institution. It didn't used to be, and it may not exist on into the future. So let's get a grip.
Well, we finally had it confirmed this evening that Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, will be going to visit Donald Trump in February. Your reaction? Some might say at last.
Well, I think that it's entirely appropriate for the British Prime Minister and the American President, whoever they are, whichever parties they are, to have a good working relationship. That doesn't mean that they have to be figures in a romance. It simply means that they need to manage the relationships which are deep and enduring between these two countries in the best interests of both countries. So it seems to me entirely appropriate that the Prime Minister should visit the President-elect after he's installed in office, and I suspect that meeting will concentrate on making sure that the relationship between our two countries stays in a business-like fashion.
And it bothers you not that Nigel Farage got there way earlier?
Well, I think that Nigel Farage, because he'd endorsed Donald Trump during the referendum, was invited in for a friendly cup of tea and the chance to take a few selfies, and that's fair enough.
I think, though, that Lionel's
Lindsey,
point...
we must move on.
Right.
I do apologise. We can come back to that in a second. But it is January, a month when we generally could do with a pick-me-up. And our Sky Data research isn't all bleak about the future, thank goodness. When asked how strongly people felt a sense of belonging to the UK, 73% of people said strongly and 23% not strongly. And people identified even more with their local area, 74% to 22%. So, Christopher, it seems strange to come to you first. You were negative, obviously, before. But do you see any optimism in the future as we move towards the process of Brexit?
Well, I hope that I hope there was more optimism, but I don't see. I think things will get worse for sure. I mean, like now, there is even a contradiction now in the data. I mean, Michael was saying that we got wrong the spending and all that, but on the one hand, people are saying in your surveys they're saying that the majority will be worse off. The country will be worse off. They don't know what's happening, and yet they're borrowing and spending. How are they going to repay those debts? If they are acting rationally. So I don't know what's going on. Now, optimism. The European Union is more, if you would say with all due respect, is more than a trade bloc. It started as a trade bloc in 1958. But gradually developed more. Obviously, it's not going to go for a political union because so many people are opposing it, but there is a very close cooperation between those countries. My worry is that Britain will not be treated by its European partners as an equal partner if some crisis comes along, like the migration crisis. There could be wars in the Middle East, all kinds of things that me as a European, as someone from a Southern European origin, one of the reasons I wanted Britain to stay in was to give a sort of voice of reason where I see sometimes voices of not so much reason.
Yes, that's the European perspective. But what about you, Lindsey? What about optimism for the UK as we head into 2017?
I think it very much depends the kind of Brexit that we go for. We should go for a Brexit which benefits the mass of ordinary people. If you look at the vote, Christopher said it's the old versus the young, but actually the very large thing that strikes you is that the poorer people in this country voted Leave much more strongly. The only two groups that voted Remain with the AB, the professionals and managerials, and we need to take this into account. And it means we have to spend money on what people need. We need to restore proper jobs. We need housing for people. We need those sorts of things. People then will feel optimistic. If they're faced with 0 hours contracts, insecurity and all the other things that they're faced with, they won't be happy. And then you do get the scapegoating of migrants, which we're seeing far too much of.
And Lionel, or is the year ahead too clouded in your thoughts about the gloom of Donald Trump coming into power?
No, I live here most of the year, and I think about it plenty. I am hopeful that if we get on the other side of actually doing Brexit, that we might find this country produces a positive form of nationalism, a sense of pride, which is unifying. My biggest anxiety, however, is not so much an economic one, but if we pull back so much from the brink that we go the so-called soft Brexit route, and Theresa May is persuaded to stay in the single market and maybe also the customs union and sign on to freedom of movement, we don't have much say, but when we didn't have that much say before, there's a kind of Norwegian situation, and everyone who voted for Leave looks around and says, well, look, nothing's changed. And that's my biggest worry, and not because of the political results, but because it would be so souring.
You've got 30 seconds to give me all rosy where you're standing, presumably. Your big dream is about to be fulfilled.
I'm going to embarrass Lindsey by agreeing with her for the third time. The vote in June the 23rd was not just a vote to leave the European Union, it was a vote for more radical change overall. And people want to see more spending on the National Health Service, better access to housing and increased wages. And so the message to the government is not just to ensure that you honour that vote, but to ensure that there is change in the lives of the overwhelmingly working class vote
and that we
delivered Brexit.
Every EU citizen who's here.
Please. We have to say
which
thank
you
you
don't agree with.
We should have made it an hour, shouldn't we? Thank you to all of you.
I agree with that, but there's going to be some collateral damage.
Plenty more on this, no doubt, in the months to come. You've been watching Nation Divided on Sky News. You can see all the week's content, including more from the head of Sky Data on mobile and online. Don't forget, my colleague Sophie Ridge will be interviewing the Prime Minister this weekend. That's in her new political programme, Sophie Ridge, on Sunday. Top stories, though, coming along next week. Good night.